What's happening, everybody? Christian Pedersen, joined by Dan Dickau as we trudge on through the off season. We welcome you back to another episode of the Gonzaga Nation podcast. Dan, there's actual college basketball to talk about, so I promise you this will be an episode where I don't catch you off guard and try and pin you into a box where you have to say something that's going to somehow upset somebody in the Gonzaga fandom. I'm done doing that until next episode. We've got some college basketball. We got a little bit of Zags and the pros to talk about, which is always fun. The transfer portal, though, is the big thing. It has impacted Gonzaga now for the first time this offseason. Plus, there's been some other, I think, not even kind of surprising, really surprising, dare I say, even shocking transfers happening in the rest of the WCC. So, Dan, thank you again, as always, for joining us. Let's start with the Gonzaga transfer news, and let's move on to the rest of the conference from there.
Well, Gonzaga really hasn't been impacted like so many other schools in the WCC and across college basketball with transfers. But they did have their first player put his name in the portal. If you followed the news closely over the last 48 hours on Twitter, I'm sure you've seen it. I believe Cole Borsman, our esteemed journalist, got a story up quickly, but it's nothing to be overly concerned about, overly worried about. Colby Brooks, who is actually entering as a grad transfer, graduated Gonzaga in 3 years, played for 21 game appearances. He scored 28 total points. So he's obviously clearly not a player that impacted the game in regards to winning and losing on the floor, but he was a tremendous locker room guy. He was a tremendous practice player, tremendous teammate. Really, from what I heard, added a lot to the culture of the program. Really was a great addition for the couple of years that he was here. Now, I mentioned it's not that big of a loss in regards to the statistics. I do mention he did add some things off the court, but I think it goes to show, there comes a point in time with pretty much every player is you want to play. Colby was a really good high school player out of the Los Angeles area, went to Loyola High School, was all league, played in a really good league. I'm sure he had plenty of offers to play maybe Division II basketball. He could have walked on in a number of Division I programs, chose Gonzaga, and now that he's got his degree, he wants to go play somewhere his final couple of years. I believe he'll have 2 years left to play. So I imagine, he will go closer to home. Now, I don't know this for a fact because I haven't spoken with him, but I would imagine he probably tries to get somewhere down in Southern California, closer to home, where maybe there's a Big West school. Maybe there's a Division II school that would be able to offer a fair amount of playing time to wrap up his college career. But for now, that's the only Gonzaga player in the portal. And I think it's so much what gets lost in these transfer portal recruiting rankings of classes is, Arkansas might be getting X amount of guys and really high ratings. What about recruiting the guys that are currently on your roster and having continuity? I think there's a lot to be said for that. Gonzaga has kind of avoided, the big roster overhauls over the years. Yeah, they've added transfers here and there, especially in the grad transfer era. Byron Wesley, Geno Crandall, Aaron Cook, Jordan Matthews, a couple names that quickly come to mind, but they never really had to do the 7, 8, 9 player roster overhaul. And I would imagine the focus is guys on our roster are better than what we could go get in the portal. So why waste our time dancing around too much? Yeah, they did add the one player, Michael Ajayi from Pepperdine, but that was such a quick recruiting. I don't think either side was interested in having something that was drawn out. There was a good fit for both. Now he is testing the NBA waters because he's a talented prospect, but I would expect to see him in a Gonzaga uniform. So there you have it. There is the latest update, but the biggest thing right now is for Gonzaga's staff to just continue to recruit the players that are currently on the roster, because I don't see a ton of difference makers that would supplant who's currently on the roster.
Yeah, you obviously have significantly more Gonzaga knowledge than I do, and intimacy with the program, but I would say that for my time being around it, the biggest overhaul of an offseason has been more symbolically, like it's been replacing Chet, replacing a Timmy or something like that. I don't think that there's ever been like a wholesale um, hey, we got to go get six guys. So I would be curious to know what even is the most starters, or however you want to phase it, or however you want to say it. Like, what is that like the largest number of players that Coach Few has had to ever replace at any point in his career, let alone in the transfer portal era or not? Because it certainly does seem kind of like you said, like it's never been something where Gonzaga has to go out and be like, all right, we need to scrap what we did last year and start all over like some of these
Yeah.
programs do.
Well, I think really, I mean, last year they had to replace Drew Timmy, Julian Strother, and Rozier Bolton, three starters right there are one of the biggest overhauls. And I think, you know, because Gonzaga and the staff has such a good kind of pulse on how they want to build rosters, they've got freshmen. They've got, second year, third year guys that are waiting to break out, like a Ben Gregg. And then they've got experienced guys that typically have been in the program, a la Anton Watson a season ago. So I think that's a major benefit to having a staff that has a philosophy that's been ingrained in each of them and that they adhere to is, you got to have roster balance. You got to have roster flexibility. You want to have roster depth. Some years you have it more so than others, but I think the balance is a key thing that is overlooked by many coaching staffs because you got to have young freshmen who are good enough or driven enough to want to improve and succeed. But they got to mesh well with the older guys that maybe are setting the tone for the culture and how the program wants to practice, to play, to travel, to act, to be, in the community. And then you need obviously the talent there where if those guys maybe need a boost from the transfer portal, you go get it. But Gonzaga has always done such a good job of mixing and matching and balancing out the roster and the makeup of it.
When it seems like it's also a credit to Coach Few and his staff and their adaptability is maybe the right word there, because we talked about Calipari the last couple of weeks committing to the one and done thing, committing to the freshman phenoms, and how that made him the biggest thing in college basketball for a run. But it now makes him somewhat of an outdated dinosaur. I don't know if it's maybe fully that, but like he no longer had like immense, like top of the world success because he stuck with what worked for him
Yeah.
in a certain era. And so for Coach Few to ebb and flow and not seemingly have to right now commit to like, these are my guys, we're just going to retain them, or these are my transfers, we're going to just, bring in mercenaries every year. But like you said, have that nice balance. Seems like, again, it just keeps reinforcing the fact that he's one of the best coaches around.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you mentioned and we talked about the Calipari philosophy and obviously if you can get a talented freshman that you think fits your program, you recruit them, right? But what you're seeing is, even the quote unquote best freshmen aren't necessarily playing major minutes or starting on teams that make deep NCAA tournament runs. The only one that quickly comes to mind for this year would be Stephon Castle at UConn. And a lot of the reason that he had the success he had was because he bought it into his role. Like he understood early in the season, like, hey, if I'm gonna play, I'm gonna earn it on the defensive end. I'm gonna be a transition guy. I'm gonna be a cutter. And then as I get comfortable with the college game and other guys are focused on more, maybe I can create some opportunities in different ways. And he showed it. I mean, he averaged nearly 30 points a game on a national title team. He's going to go to the NBA as a one and done, and not just a one and done on projected potential. Like he was a legitimate starter, difference maker on a national title team. You're not going to see that as much as maybe you did in years past because, teams want experience. Experience wins in the NCAA tournament. And there's going to be, I think there's going to be fewer of those freshmen that play major minutes on teams that go deep in the NCAA tournament. So that again becomes a big part of cultivating your roster, balancing out your roster, to kind of have success with the ups and downs of not just a season, but a cycle of a couple seasons, so that if maybe you don't hit it rich, so to speak, in the transfer portal, you can kind of cover up some of those lows. And I think that's one of the most impressive things for Gonzaga in regards to, 25 straight years in the NCAA tournament, I think it is now, and 9 straight Sweet 16s. Those lows have been covered up pretty darn well. And yes, there's been a lot of highs. The only high that's left to climb is winning that national title. But balancing out the roster and looking in those ways is big.
I want to talk some NBA with you, little zags in the NBA, but is there anything else headline wise that we need to talk about transfer portal in the WCC?
Well, I think the big one that happened last week was pretty shocking. And I think this has to do with NIL money and opportunities that are out there. And that's Aiden Mahaney with St. Mary's. Put his name in the portal, and he's getting a lot of interest. Some of the early schools that I saw that showed interest are your Dukes, your Alabamas, your I think Baylor I saw on the list, Ohio State I think I saw on the list, Michigan, um, you know, I think I saw Arizona. I'm not 100% sure. But, it kind of shows you the challenge that a lot of smaller budgeted schools and programs are going to have if they have a young breakout star like Aiden Mahaney, kind of really look and search and see, hey, I'm making X at my current school, but if I were to do this at a bigger school, I might make 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times X. And so I'm sure that was a big thing, part of what he was looking at. The other thing might be was, if this is what he's looking at, and again, I don't know, I think it would be wrong. And the fact that he might be looking, to try to prepare himself to play in the NBA. I think he's a player who's going to have a legitimate chance, but St. Mary's has produced NBA guards over the 15 years. Della Vadova, Patty Mills, and then some other guys have had cracks at it. Jordan Ford, so I think, if that one was a shocker, that one was interesting, especially because you look at the family tradition going back, or the family history with Aiden Mahaney growing up with Randy Bennett's son, playing youth basketball, playing high school basketball, all of those things together. And that's a bit of a shocker. But in this day and age of college basketball, really, nothing's a shock.
Other than, damn it, I somehow was trying to make a Wichita State joke there because they're the Shockers, but couldn't pull up the college name fast enough there. Yeah, I'm torn because when this whole NIL concept was coming out 4 or 5 years ago, really being introduced to the national narrative, there was so much talk about how this is just going to destroy the traditions of college basketball. And it seems like largely it hasn't. But then every now and then there's a kid like this where you're like, okay, whoa, like all of the boxes that you checked on that knows Randy Bennett, tradition at this call, like, but money. But like there has to be some other opportunity that he'll land at, and we'll go, okay, I guess that makes sense. But yeah, it's interesting how the allure of cash has not entirely eroded the game overnight the way that a lot of initial people of the purist, oh, it's amateur athletics, let's not bless it, let's not ruin it with this. So I will be curious to see where he ends up, and like you said, what that trajectory is, because obviously he would have wound up with a shot at the NBA anyway, but we're not in those camps, we don't know everything that's going on there. Any other names in the portal in the WCC?
Those are the ones that's the biggest one that jumps out to me in regards to WCC. I do know, the portal for undergraduates, excuse me, to put their name in ends in a week or so. There's already, I think, 1,800 names in the list, give or take a little bit, but it'll probably approach close to 2,000. And when you think about that, that is an enormous amount of movement in college basketball. I was looking at either, I think it was On3 this morning, just to kind of better gauge how many players are in the portal and who's going where. And you're seeing a ton of lateral transfers, right? Like, so similar leagues, school league to league, and it makes you wonder, like, okay, is there a connection there? Is it moving closer to home? Is it an assistant coach at a new school? They had recruited a player before. Is it an NIL bonus or a boost in what they had made the year before? Is the new coach seeing something maybe the current coach at that player the school is transferring away from isn't seeing or didn't see to allow him to maybe play it up to his level of potential? So many things that really can't be addressed. I think at the end of the day, I get it. College athletes are going to transfer. But I think at the end of the day, so many of these players, if they would just focus on the task at hand day to day, week by week, month by month, a lot of their frustrations, and mainly it comes down to playing time for players, uh, would be appeased, would be taken care of. The for the most part, your NIL money is going to be similar if you're transferring straight across. Now, if you have an unbelievable season and you go from, say, a low major or mid major up to a power school, yeah, that's going to change things. But what if you what if you were take Dalton Connect as a perfect example of that. That's one thing. But then, say you were a mid-major that's focused, the focus of your offensive attack, and you're able to play to your strengths and really showcase yourself, maybe for the NBA, but if not, to be able to play overseas and you're averaging 15, 16 a game, 6 rebounds a game and whatnot, as opposed to going to a power five where now maybe you're averaging 5 and 3 in limited role and your team doesn't win. I don't see that as being beneficial to that player, because if you're averaging 15 and 6 and your team wins, um, European teams are going to have value in that. So we're still only 2.5 years or so into this whole NIL thing. I said at the start it was going to take a few years to kind of level out. I think it's going to take more than that initial 2 or 3 that I said. I think from this day, it still takes another 2, maybe 3 years. So that's about a 5-year timeline overall for things to kind of really get figured out. And the other thing we haven't even ever touched on, because it keeps changing, is, the unionization of these college athletes, trying to create a union. I don't even want to try to understand that or go down that road. And then the other idea that's come up is, making these athletes employees of the university. Okay, well, what exactly does that mean? That those two topics right there are entire podcast shows in and of its own, because there's so many different facets that you have to understand and take into consideration when you talk about those. Those aren't just quick blanket statements. Those are big, in-depth conversations.
Yeah. And one that I have, you kind of hit some of my thesis on the head about all of this of it's not necessarily great for you as a player, as a commodity, to go ride the pine at a major D1 Power 5 school. I can
Yeah.
tell you definitively, the viewers, I have a ton of accumulated hardware over in a little trophy case over there that meant absolutely nothing for my draft stock, because I never pitched and I never got on a mound, and no pro team had any interest in taking a flyer on a middle reliever that threw 2/3 of an inning in 4 years. It does nothing for you. So yeah, I can tell you that, like Dan said, it's an interesting thought of, if I go 60 schools down in the rankings, it gives me a ton more opportunity to then, oh yeah, okay, maybe you're in Warsaw, but you're making good money playing in Poland. Like, it's not a bad gig compared to not being anywhere in the pros because you just needed to go to Ohio State because
Yep.
that's what you grew up a fan of. And then you scored 2 points in 4 years. Like, it's interesting. I don't think that the NIL has been quite the Scud missile that came in and was going to destroy all of it. It's been fine. Like, and if anything, a lot of these schools just haven't raised a ton of money, and it's not like some donor cashed in a bunch of Bitcoin and said, okay, now the University of Miami has $1 billion to play with. Like, it's just not happening like that. I do also, with Dan, when you say those numbers, I always like the visual of there being a physical portal and coaches just hitting shuffle and like random players coming out and them having to decide, do we want to keep a 6'1" shooting guard? Nah, throw him back. All right, this guy, nah, throw him back. Because how do you sort through 1,800 to 2,000 names? Like, obviously, you have a staff that's dedicated to it, but at some point, like, can you really put in the legwork to even take 10 seconds to identify who some of those players are? It's just an insane number. Um, that all being said, though, let's talk about some Zags in the pros because the NBA playoffs are here. Chet's got a national ad campaign for what a pro wants. Well, he sings a little bit. I don't know if he actually did the vocals, but hey, Chet, you got a nice voice. If that is you singing, good little backup vocal career. If the NBA doesn't work out for you, give the people the rundown on what the Zags are doing in the NBA playoffs.
Yeah, there's a lot of Zags currently playing in the playoffs. Obviously, Domantas Sabonis and the Kings lost in the play-in, but there's a lot of guys still playing right now. Jalen Suggs with the Magic, they lost game one. He struggled a little bit: 13 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 4 16 from the field, 1 7 from three. But that's going to be a very interesting series to keep an eye on because they're both really evenly matched teams. Suggs matching up with Donovan Mitchell and or Darius Garland are really good matchups. I think Suggs has really endeared himself to the fans in Orlando with how he plays and the effort, and no different than what Gonzaga fans saw in the one year he played in Spokane. So that's one to look out for. The other one is Chet with the 1 seed Oklahoma City Thunder. I mean, he had a terrific playoff debut: 15 points, 11 rebounds, 5 blocks. I think he's the one of the only, if not the only, player to ever post those numbers in a playoff debut. Had a really big block with under a minute left to essentially seal the win. They ended up winning by 2. So he's off to a heck of a start there. And then you go back to the Eastern Conference. Andrew Nembhard with the Pacers played 30 minutes in their first game, even though they lost to the Milwaukee Bucks. He played okay, 6 points, but his emphasis and his performances are probably really going to be based defensively in this series, simply for the fact that he's going to have the assignment of Damian Lillard quite a bit. I watched a few minutes of the game the other night, and everything with Giannis out, everything starts and ends with Damian Lillard for the Bucks. And so, Lillard had a good game, but he had to earn it all. I thought Nembhard had some nice stretches defensively. But if Indiana's going to get that upset win, I think Andrew Nembhard's going to have a terrific series, which I think he's capable of. And then the last couple Gonzaga players that are in the playoffs, back to the Western Conference, you got the Nuggets versus the Lakers. Julian Strawther didn't play in the first game. I don't expect to see him play much, if at all, in this series. It's just the way that the Nuggets are built in the stage of his career that he's in. I think there's a growth curve, a learning curve to everything, like we've talked about many times. But he didn't play in game one. But on the flip side, for the Lakers, Rui started, had 7 points, only 2 of 4 from the field. So, obviously everything for the Lakers is geared around LeBron, Anthony Davis, and then Austin Reeves kind of picks up a lot of those third touches, so to speak. So Rui's kind of really got to be opportunistic when he gets opportunities. But those are the Gonzaga players to follow that are alive in the playoffs.
Dan, let's close out with this. You kind of talked about the next deadline for the portal is undergraduates and their names. It doesn't seem like there's any major news, but I'll just say, what are you looking at? Are you looking at in the next couple weeks? No news is good news for Gonzaga, or got to have a couple of things happen?
Well, I think no news is good news, simply for the fact that I like how this roster is, with no more changes, is shaping up for next season. I do. I think if you got to find a way to replace Anton, in particular his attributes that don't show up on a box score, in his leadership. I think you can find ways to manufacture extra points through different guys or growth of different players and things like that. But you got to find that kind of X factor guy like Anton. Who's that going to be? Does Ben Gregg continue to evolve into that? Maybe does Luka Krajinovic become someone who's, dependable night in, night out? Steel Venters, how healthy is he going to be, and can he kind of take some of that load? So there's lots of possibilities there. I think with the NBA early entrant draft deadline starting soon, I would not be surprised to see another Gonzaga player or two put their name in the draft. Whether it's Graham Ike, Ryan Nemhart, Nolan Hickman, even just to test the waters, just to get a couple NBA workouts under their belt, just to hear from that perspective, because all these guys want to play in the NBA, right? Just to get from their perspective from the NBA front office, what their possible value is now, what it could be in a year from now if they work on XYZ skills, or they refine the things that are even putting them on NBA teams' radars. So I wouldn't be surprised if a couple guys put their name in the draft. I don't think any of them would stay in the draft. I've seen bigger surprises, but I don't think anybody on Gonzaga's roster currently, is that valued by a front office. And I don't say that in a negative way at all. I'm just saying it in reality. I think there's lots of guys that have potential to be there at some point in their basketball careers, but just at this moment in time, I don't see it. So that's
just
really the only thing I see.
Is sometimes you're just not an NBA player. You can be a fantastic college player, so it's not an indictment of like you said, it's not an indictment of what the current Gonzaga roster is. There is just nobody currently right there who is a first 10 picks kind of thing. So probably not somebody who's willing to risk the rest of their college eligibility to try and sit out the rest of the draft and see if they get swooped up in the last day, or you don't want to be an undrafted free agent. There's not a lot of NBA slots and spots for that kind of stuff. So, all right, Dan, we'll file it under good. No news is good news. Transfer portal for the undergrads is going to close next year. There is nothing else that you got. We will say thank you very much, Gonzaga fans, for tuning in. And as always, we'll remind you, Dan is in that studio cranking out great, amazing, high quality content, where his co-hosts don't accidentally say things that are just completely foot and mouth type statements, like I have scrubbed out from the earlier part of this podcast, that none of you will ever know the mistake I made. Ha ha ha. Thank you though for tuning in, and everybody, we'll talk to you guys next week.